What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.
How to podcast? Denver studio? This is the series. Every Sunday I've covered the steps on how to create a podcast. Currently breaking down the different studios that I've had through the existence of the Inspired Disorder podcast. And then later I'll go in and break down other podcasts, production-wise, just so you get an idea of different setups and different ways you can produce your podcast. So the big move, the first time designing like a full studio, it's going to be a two-person studio, including all of the technology and abilities that previous studios had doing the Inspired Disorder podcast. Moving to Denver, meeting Keith in person for the first time, living with Keith for 2 years it lasted. So the Denver, it took forever to try and figure out how to get the Denver studio to work. I knew I wanted to change the camera. I ended up using a GoPro camera that I got a AC adapter for, so I didn't have to worry about batteries. And then you have I think it's like a USB. You can export the video live, so I had that go from the camera to a capture card, an external capture device, which your camera plugs into, and then that converts the video into a data signal that you can plug into your computer. So you can then, because I was using the software Wirecast, which allowed me to broadcast live to Facebook and Twitter and Ustream, all of the different broadcasting platforms that are available online, allowed me to switch camera angles, switch scenes, do all kinds of stuff in the app, live editing, and then also have a finished edited file at the end of it that I just had to upload. So production-wise was set up completely different and maintained for this one. So getting everything to work within that system, I needed a different camera. Before I used just a standard webcam for my camera, but now I am going to a GoPro, plug that in, and then that capture card plugged into the computer. So trying to figure out the right settings for the card, all of that was a pain in the ass. Then there was a separate computer that was used for Skype, used for websites, whatever was displayed on the podcast, whether it be video, websites, Skype video of our guest. That was a computer that was in front of us. It was a Mac Mini hooked up to like a 20-inch monitor. Then it had its own webcam that showed Keith and I, and then there was a TV between us that mirrored the same image that was on the monitor in front of us. So if we had somebody on Skype, we could look straight ahead and look at our camera and the TV and their webcam, and then behind us, between us, was our guest. So that was that computer, which we used for playing trailers. We used for the Ultimate Movie Championship. We used for our fight picks, where we brought up the fight cards. So it was a heavily used piece of the studio. Audio went into the mixer separately from that Mac. Then we had both of our mics went into the mixer. Same mixer that I used before. It was a 15 or 16 track Behringer with a USB output. The TVs, the one between us, this is like a 42-inch Vizio and then a 20-inch monitor. Those were both run off a splitter, HDMI splitter, so HDMI out from the Mac Mini, and then those things were running off of that same thing. We also I had to control my laptop, which was farther away. I had a programmable keypad that allowed me, each key would change it to a new slide. So I would go from our intro, like holding image, to our intro video, and then to the different camera angles we had. I had a webcam that was connected to, well, I actually moved the guest webcam because we just stopped having guests, and I moved that to the coffee table that was in front of us for when we reviewed comic books. We could have a close-up shot of the comic book that we were talking about. So that ended up being our separate camera angle. and it was awesome. It was exactly what we needed for our production. I mean, everything else was the same. Going to Wirecast, I couldn't go live because a lot of the time our internet was shitty. Just being in that apartment. But I think we did go live still. I don't remember. But it was a complex studio. No longer had the sound effect board that I used to use for the intro, outro. That was changed. Everything was basically structured more through the Wirecast software, where I'd have like 10 different slides that we would go through, and those would change depending on what episode we were recording. Versus, if we were doing a Ultimate Movie Championship versus UFC picks, I would have to reset up and recalibrate the Wirecast software to have the appropriate slides for the appropriate keys. It was a whole thing. It was by far the most complex setup, and it was smooth because it was all. If you watch any of the old episodes, I think from episode 195, I think, is when we started in Denver, all the way up through almost 400, wherever it was, just before I moved back to the desert. We were doing 2 episodes a day. Each episode was like 2 hours, basically two episodes in one, the way it was structured. So we'd have a little space in between for promotion. So if we reviewed a movie, at the end of it, we would play some Ultimate Movie Championship. Fights, we would recap in the first half of whatever fight we just watched. In the second half, we would make picks for the pick bet that we used to do, Keith and I. But yeah, that was by far the most complex setup that we had. The Mac Mini that was used for displaying websites and Skype and all that also had, because audio from the mixer was going back into it, so if we had a Skype call, our person on Skype could hear us or any music that was being played. I was able to have that as my backup recorder. So I had GarageBand recording on the Mac Mini as well as my Mac Pro. So if audio didn't work, which happened, that's one thing. The more complex your studio is, the more chance for things to go wrong, and things went wrong all the time. But technology herpes is part of the game. Expect one of the main things as a podcast producer is fixing problems. I've noticed, however, that since going to more of a post-production kind of a production method, like everything I did before was live to tape, so I didn't have to do any editing afterwards. Now I do things completely different, where I record and audio and video separately and do everything in post. It was definitely a smooth, streamlined situation, but that smooth, streamlined situation still had its problems. Versus now, not as many problems. Thankfully, technology, just because I have less things doing. Like when we would do an episode, a mixer would have to be working, both of our mics, both of our headphones, audio lines going from the different computers, my thing controlling this computer, both recordings. There is a lot of places where things can go wrong. So having everything kind of separated to just kind of work independently and put it all together later is more reliable in that sense. But that's a breakdown of the studio, the Denver studio. Future episodes, we'll see what I'm going to talk about next week on the next Sunday. But I'll be breaking down some kind of podcast. If you have questions, for sure, ask those. But if you want to check out all the work I've done, including all the podcasts that I've produced, go to inspireddisorder.com. Follow me on social media at Ray Taylor. Have a wonderful day and a great week, okay? That's all you got to do. Just try and have a great day. Just good, decent, above average, all right? Peace out!